Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Plan B Success. Today we have Ron Malhotra from Australia. Ron's a thought leader, an entrepreneur, an international speaker, certified success coach, a wealth planner, a leadership trainer, has been a radio host, has his own podcast, and is also a best selling author. Now, before he did all this, he was actually an employee working his way up in his professional career. And at some point, he decided to make the transformation and he turned into who he is today. And I believe he has several years of background that he can share with us. But let's go back to that very first part, Ron. First of all, welcome aboard. And let's go back and start with where your journey started.
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. But I like the flavor of your show. It seems like it's a lot deeper, and there's a little bit of intensity about it, which I like, because a lot of the podcasts tend to be more around the surface level. But it seems like this is a well-considered concept. So thanks for having me on board. Look, my journey, I mean, like most people, I came from an Indian heritage. So there was we were indoctrinated into believing that what is going to make us successful is going down the path of traditional education and then trying to secure some sort of prestigious employment in a corporation and then working your way up. And we had, like most young people, I had not decided what success was going to be for me. So I blindly chased the things that I thought were going to make me successful, which was, how do I land a job, which is going to give me a prestigious title and it's going to give me financial security. And then how can I then use that financial security to buy some lifestyle assets and make myself feel important? And so I went down that path, and that's where I was throughout my 20s and up until my early 30s. And then at some point, the realization started to kick in that there was some sort of a vacuum inside that I was feeling. It was a feeling of void. I was basically coming home and arguing with my wife for no reason. And there was almost this sense of dissatisfaction. In the beginning, I felt there was something wrong with me. I need to be more grateful because I have so many things that a lot of other people don't have. But then it started to dawn on me that there's no point having all of this external success when intrinsically I don't feel aligned and I don't feel congruent. And I'm lacking that deep sense of conviction in who I am and where I'm going. And that's when my real education actually started in my early 30s, when I decided that I was going to rediscover and reinvent who I am and become really clear on what kind of blueprint, what kind of footprint I want to leave on the planet, and who I really am in my essence. And I started to realize that I was a byproduct of the conditioning that I had picked up from culture, from parental conditioning, from media conditioning. And this is not an attack on anybody. It's just the way we live. We live through what other people believe is acceptable. And I think it started to dawn on me that I knew very little about myself. And that's when I started. I guess I started on a different lane and decided that where I was not entirely appropriate for the type of person I wanted to become. And then that's when my new journey started.
I can relate to what you're saying. I have a similar heritage and I can totally relate to all that you said. So let me ask you this. So when you made the realization, when you had this realization that you wanted to reinvent yourself, that's the most crucial part. On the one end, you're vulnerable and, you're so used to this comfort zone that you've been in. And now you have this void that you're trying to fill and you want to reinvent yourself. So that aspect of it, now several years later, you're at a totally different point. But the metamorphosis, so to speak, how did that come about and what were the challenges you had during that time?
Well, it's always scary to make the transformation when you've got a good thing going. You see, when you have nothing to lose, you have no choice. You have to make the transformation, right? You have to make the transition into something else. But when you have a good thing going, when you have recognition in your industry, when you are performing well in your job, and you actually even like what you're doing, it's your zone of excellence. and you've acquired the skills over the years to be able to do it well. You have good financial security, and people recognize you and respect you for what you do. To walk away from all of that is actually a lot harder to compared to when things are not going well, because there's very little incentive to walk away from all of those things. When you work so hard to develop all of that, it's hard to walk away. But what I knew was, and upon close reflection, what I knew was that I was disconnected. And this was nagging at me. There was something telling me that this was not an authentic way of living. There's something that was telling me that I'm kind of fake in regards to the type of life that I'm living. There was this sense of imposter syndrome. And no matter what I drove and where I lived and what I wore, the self-esteem was not internal. It was externally acquired. And so this sense was nagging at me, and the biggest fear was, well, for me to now start again means I have to walk away. I have to be prepared to walk away from everything that I've built so far. And even the thought was scary, because am I ever going to be able to achieve this level of success? Because a lot of people did see me as successful, and I'm sure a lot of people would have loved to have traded places with me, and said, well, you have everything at such a young age, why do you want to walk away from it? And my people in my family did think I was stupid for questioning this, and a lot of people just thought that this is a syndrome where young people these days are never satisfied, never grateful, and because they get everything so quickly, they have this thing of now wanting to embrace spirituality. So there was a lot of skepticism around me, and it all makes sense. Even I was skeptical about what I was going through. Even I wasn't sure if this was if I was on the right track with my thinking. But I knew that there was something wrong. And I knew that I could right now make a choice to remain in my zone of excellence, or I could go towards my zone of genius. I realized that there was another level here. And I couldn't achieve that level. You can't get to the other side of the shore until you're prepared to leave the safety of the shore that you're on. And so it's almost like I felt like I had to be willing to walk away from this. And there was uncertainty, of course, in the future. I had no idea whether I thought, well, am I an entrepreneur? Is that the next best thing? I mean, because that's what people always assume, is that the evolution from corporate is to in entrepreneurship. So that was one option. But then it was more like, well, I'm not really interested in setting up a business for the sake of setting up a business. I'm not a tech guy. I don't see myself working in Silicon Valley. I'm just not one of those people. So the question that's when the real journey started, with the question, who am I? And that was a very difficult question to answer, because I never asked myself that question before. And when you ask yourself that question, and you start to realize that who you are is more than your name, because you didn't pick your name. It's more than your nationality. You didn't pick your nationality. It's more than your religious and cultural orientation. Most of the time, that's is something that we inherit through parental conditioning. It's more than even your occupation, because a lot of the times, even the occupation is a byproduct of external influences. So when you start to ask yourself that question, who am I? If I was to be stripped of my culture, nationality, name, and occupation, who would I be? And that's a scary question to start with, because you start to realize, the first realization kicks in, that you actually have no freaking idea who you are. None. You've been living from the outside in. And that's part of the reason why so many people feel lack of fulfillment, because they realize that the ladder of success that they've climbed has been leaning against the wrong wall. And it was the same realization for me. It was scary. But I knew that, I had made some reconciliations in my mind about the fact that we only live once. I knew at the time that if you actually break down the number of years that we live on a life expectancy, on an average, the average human being lives about 80 years, which really works out to 4,000 weekends, if you really think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're already, 30 and you're in your early 30s, you've already used up 1,500 of those weekends. And really, you're not going to do the greatest things in your life. The probability of you doing the greatest things in your life after the age of 60, 65 is pretty slim. So when you start to take the number of weekends out, you start to realize you only got 1,000 weekends or something like that to do whatever you're going to do in life. And you can either live in fear and conformity and stick to what you already know and stick to what you already have, or have the character and courage to step into what you know could be your real potential. And so in the beginning, it's always scary, but then as you start to reconcile those ideas and you start to confront the truth that this is the amount of time that you have, and is it really worthwhile to live incongruently with your values when the ultimate price that you pay is that no matter what you do, you can't acquire that real self-confidence. And that's when I realized that it was worth walking away from. And, you know, I've always been a financially driven guy. I've never I've never been in shame of that. Like a lot of people feel shame about admitting that they want more money. I've always wanted more money, but I guess the real evolution happened when I realized that the most successful people in the world are not those who have money, but those who have been able to acquire money and wealth doing what they love, and it makes a positive difference in the world. That's when I realized that that was the sweet spot I wanted to play in. I wanted to have money, absolutely wanted to have the lifestyle and financial security, but how I got there was really important. So I wanted to get there in a way that I would be alive, I would be inspired, but also doing something that would make a difference to the world. Because when I did my test on my own values, my number one value was legacy. It's so important for me to create things that outlive me. And I'm naturally inspired, naturally disciplined, and naturally organized when I'm doing something that I know is going to outlive me. So that's where, you know, I realized that I had to walk away from it and then start with asking myself who I am, what I really want, and what kind of footprint I want to leave on the planet. And that's when the new journey started.
So, how much time did it take you from leaving your job to getting to the point where you really understood what you wanted to do and you started executing on it?
Look, I had a little bit of clarity when I made the transformation. I don't think you can't wait for total clarity. I think a lot of the clarity comes with execution and with courage. You don't work everything out in your mind per se. You actually work it out through experience. I knew enough to know that what I was doing was not me. It wasn't entirely me, that it couldn't define me. That I knew enough, right? So I knew that what I was doing could not be a holistic description of who I wanted to become. So that was sufficient for me to take a leap of faith into the unknown. But I had a fair idea as to where I started to, you know, take stock of my strengths and my passion and my values. So starting to get clear. And one of the realizations I had was that we actually take our clients through this exercise. We ask them this question: who are you in your spirit? Who are you in your mind? And who are you in your heart? And what I realized was that in my spirit, I'm a teacher. It's like I've been designed for teaching. And when I look back at, you know, elements from my childhood and I look back at childhood experiences, it just seems like the whole plan has been gearing me towards becoming a teacher. And that's why I realized I was always gravitating towards professions that had to do with advising, mentoring, consulting, coaching, because they're all forms of teaching. So that's when I realized that that's who I was. And even though I knew my zone of excellence was giving advice in the wealth space, and I've maintained that because I do love it, I realized that there was another level for me, and that was for me to operate from my zone of genius. And I realized that as I started to put pen to paper and I thought I'm going to start writing and I'm going to start speaking, it confirmed for me that this is something that I was naturally born to do. And but then again, having said that, I didn't want to end up like some of those unrealistic dreamers who, you know, have a dream and they say, well, I have a dream and I'm going to do this, I'm going to be, you know, on purpose, I'm going to be on passion, but then they're broke. I didn't want to be one of those people.
Right.
I still wanted to be smart enough and strategic enough to say, yes, I'm going to do what I love. I'm going to do what I was born to do. I'm going to do what impacts the world positively, but I must also commercialize it successfully, because otherwise I'll just become one of those delusional people who want to try and change the world, but never do because they lack the financial resources to be able to do it. So this is where I had to blend hard-based thinking with mind-based thinking to then go, well, you know, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. And then I had to acquire the skills along the way. But once you know your why, and it's been said before, you know, once you know your why, the how takes care of itself. And I have to agree with that, because once I knew why I had to do this, the how just started to become evident over a period of time. And that's why today I very emphatically I say to people, if you're going to, the number one skill required to become successful is courage. You can have all the intellect in the world, you can have all the wisdom in the world, you can have all the desire in the world, you can have the best intent in the world. If you haven't got the courage, you're not going to make it happen.
And how long have you been doing this, Ron?
I think it was in my early 30s that I decided I was going to make the transition, but I hadn't made the full transition. I started to engage with it, sort of dabble into it. Then I started to become a bit more serious. And I think it was somewhere in my 33, 34, I think, when I really decided that this is how I wanted to live. And for me to have the independence of being able to pursue what I really wanted to do and become who I want to become, I needed to have flexibility. Because one of the biggest issues in working in a full-time job is that it takes up all of your time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's really no time for self-discovery. There's really no time to explore. There's really no time to experiment. There's no time to mingle with people outside of your industry. So one of the things I kind of realized was I must leave job security, and then that will allow me to explore more, because I still hadn't fully discovered who I was and what I wanted to do. But it was important for me to do that. So one of the decisions that I made was, back then, I sold my house. I sold the home that we used to live in, which was a beautiful home. We used to have people say that this was their dream home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not an easy decision to make. It's not an easy decision to sell your home,
Right.
and decide that, and I had a lot to, it could have easily, I said to my wife, look, here's the thing. Either I make it happen in a much better way than I ever have, and we go into a much more, even a better home, or I rent for the rest of my life, and that's my punishment for being stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And as we speak now, we did end up building our dream home, which is better than what we had. And there was many times throughout the journey where I doubted my decision, but I then learned that I needed to keep my attention and my emotions fixated on what I want, not what I don't want, because fear can set in so easily, especially when things go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
People start coming up to you, see, I told you it was not going to work. See, I told you it's going to be hard. See, I told you it's going to cost you a lot of money. Yeah. And in those moments, what you do and how you respond will determine whether you stay on that journey or you give up and change lanes. I decided to stay on the journey.
So obviously your wife, your family supported you through your decision.
My wife supported me. She wasn't happy, but she supported me. She was sad because we loved that home, and we had built, not built that home, but we had made it what it was. Not to mention that we had spent an incredible amount of money doing it up. So we had to walk away from all of that, and those are not easy considerations. And but she did support me, because one of the things I realized in life is people will accept you on your own evaluation of yourself. If you lack self-belief, others will lack belief in you. And I'm not talking about fabricating some sort of a fake belief in yourself. I'm talking about belief that comes from understanding. And one of the things I kind of realized was that we humans are very powerful. And when you start to understand the spiritual and universal laws, which I really, a lot of my education is in that, it's about really understanding that only in the short term circumstances can defeat you. In the long term, we can create circumstances. And once I was convinced of that, I backed myself up completely. And look, to some people that may have come across as arrogance, but for me it wasn't. It was just about a deep faith that once we align ourselves with what we're meant to do and we put everything into it and we become wholly committed, we can make anything happen. And when I say we, I believe all humans can make it happen. I
Right.
don't think I'm exceptionally intelligent or talented in any way. I just have a belief and a faith in the fact that we do create our own circumstances.
I want to take you a little bit, further behind, further back. One of the things that I learned about you, and I think I saw it on a video recently, was in your 20s, you talked about self-esteem issues as well as suicidal tendencies at a point in time. So how did you deal with that, and how did that help to shape you later?
Well, I didn't deal with it very well at all. And this is where I went from having no self-esteem and being frustrated and broke to thinking that somehow a prestigious position and money is going to make me happy and make me matter. So what I was trying to do was I was trying to fix the self-esteem issue externally, and that's what I did. And that's the whole, from my 20s to my 30s, that was what I did, was I tried to put the Band-Aid on
Mm-hmm.
rather than dealing with it internally. And we, you know, at that point, in that age, if you don't have good mentors and you don't have good guides around you, you don't even know that there is such a thing called an internal self-discovery. You don't even know that this concept exists. You don't have a mental model for it. So, you know, so like everybody else, you just blindly follow the system. You know, you try and gain your self-esteem through external mechanisms. And that's what I did. And then that's when I realized, after having done that for, you know, 10 years of my life, kind of realized that I was on the wrong path. And when people realize they're on the wrong path, most of the times what happens is we say, well, I'm on the wrong path. I've kind of realized I'm on the wrong path, but I'm so far ahead now. For me to turn around and then start again, it's too much. So I'm going to remain on the wrong path.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that because I had the same doubts myself. But what I knew was that if I don't turn around, I'm not going to ever discover who I really am and what my potential is. And then as I realized, as I did a lot of personal development education and through my own personal experiences, I realized that when you're on the right path, you'll actually make quantum leaps into your life. Whereas if you're on the wrong path, you'll be working very hard to make small incremental improvements. It's almost like swimming against the tide versus going with the tide. And so I realize now, and I'm such a big advocate of telling people that you must follow your purpose and your passion, but do it in a sensible way. Don't like be so stupid to be fully driven and get carried away by your feelings. Have a strategic plan of action. This is why we have a mind as well, not just a heart. You combine the heart intelligence with mind intelligence, and then you unleash your spiritual intelligence. And I believe you become an unstoppable human being.
You know, one of the other things that I did see is that you've studied a lot. You have several certificates and degrees and other things on the academic side of things. And then, you know, then you've done a lot of different things, right? You continue to do a lot of different things, whether it's you know, the perfect male, I believe, isn't that what the organization is called?
The successful male.
Successful male. Yeah. And then, you know, with Ron Malhotra International, you've been doing different things. You had a radio show at a point in time. You have a podcast. You have your programs. And I did see that, you know, although it could be different channels, you did say that it's all about helping other people. And that's the one thing that you put as your compass in terms of where you're going and what you're doing. Have you had any mentors yourself through your journey, or has it been your own self discovery as a result of doing your own self analysis?
A really good question. So I guess the first part is I was never academically inclined, but I'm obsessed with self-improvement. If I think self-improvement is going to come from professional education, then I'll pursue professional education. If I think it's going to come from personal development education, then I'll pursue personal development education. If I believe self-improvement is going to come from having the right mentors, I'll pursue mentorship. And I've done them all. So I was not academically inclined in my 20s. I could barely finish a certificate, let alone a bachelor's degree or even a master's degree or the PhD that I'm doing now. And forget about writing a book. I could barely read a book. But one thing I realized was that who I thought I was, you know, I never thought I was academic. I never thought I was a person who was interested in education or learning. It's because I was being forced down a certain path. When I realized who I actually was and what I wanted to do, my desire for learning just magnified exponentially. And so that's when I became self-initiated. I didn't need anybody to discipline me, push me, motivate me to learn. I was seeking some answers. And so naturally I invested in professional education, funded it myself. I invested in personal development education, spent over $250,000. Um, and I did get mentored. I've been mentored by some of the best people on the planet. I was making money in my business and I was investing majority of my money on myself. So I was taking large chunks of money out. I still remember the discussions with our accountant used to say, you know, to my wife, he makes good money, but geez, he spends a lot of money on his education.
Hmm.
And that's because I knew that it's been said that the best return you're going to get is on yourself, but I wasn't even doing it with that intent. I was just doing it because I was seeking some answers. My frustration was that as I was seeking answers, everybody was giving you a particular piece of information or insight. So somebody would talk about mindset, somebody would talk about wealth, somebody would talk about business, somebody would talk about leadership, somebody would talk about influence, somebody would talk about creativity, so everyone's talking about different things. And I couldn't piece the picture together. It's almost like every mentor was giving you a piece of the jigsaw. And I'm very grateful to the mentors I've had. But the problem was nobody was giving me a full picture. And when you don't know what you don't know, you don't even know what questions to ask. You just blindly try and learn. But then I started to connect the dots and I started to realize why very few people in the world become holistically successful in their ability to be able to design the life and lifestyle that they want. And it's because they don't have a full picture of what success needs to look like. And that's when I decided that I was going to teach people what are all the elements that result in a holistically successful life, where you mentally evolve, intellectually evolve, spiritually evolve, financially evolve, emotionally evolve, and you're evolved in every sense of the word, not just in one where you're only developing one type of intelligence. And that's why the successful male was born. The successful male, why we decided to start with the men's market, was because that's where we saw the biggest issues. Women are quite ambitious and they are now doing better than men on all accounts, from entrepreneurship to academic scores to discipline to emotional intelligence to connections to relationship management, even in the military in many cases. And so what's happening is men were falling behind. And because I was one of those men who had suffered with ignorance and did not have any role models, I decided, especially when I looked at the statistics around men's suicide, depression, anxiety, and violence, I decided that holistic success education needs to become available and accessible to men. And most men are either not educated or if they're educated, they're only educated in being able to perform the job that they need to do. So they've got education in a particular skill, but when it comes to self-education and education of spiritual laws and education of business and financial fundamentals, they were lacking. So that's when I decided to come up with a successful male to first assist the men's market. And then we're now next year launching the successful woman, because of great demand from women that they are also looking for holistic success education. But really, again, it all just comes down to, rather than being an opportunist and jumping on a business opportunity, for me, it was coming from a much deeper place. I was seeking meaning. I wanted to do something that inspired me. I wanted to match it with a problem that right now exists in the world. And I wanted to make a difference. And so that's why all of my businesses, the Ron Malhotra International Business, my programs called MBA of Success, we're launching the Future Millionaires Academy, the Successful Male, the Successful Woman. We have a program called Magnify You, which takes intelligent professionals and executives from being a professional to becoming an established thought leader so that they can make the impact that they want. All of my programs are coming from the same place. How do I not help people? I'm not about helping. How do I enable people? Helping to me is a bit of an issue. I find that helping makes people feel helpless. You
Right.
see, there is an underlying notion that I'm helping you because you are helpless. And what I believe helping does, even though you've got the right intent, the unintended consequences of trying to help people is that it reinforces their helplessness and it takes away their dignity. So I'm not about helping, I'm about enabling people, which is about getting them to stretch. I challenge people. I don't like to give handouts. I don't like to make it easy for people, because that's not how you bring out the best in people. So I have a very different philosophy on it, but I guess that's my way of helping, is to enable people.
So when all the work that you've done over the years, all your programs, do you keep track of the success rate and how people are doing and where they are today?
Yes, of course. And we are in constant touch. We have a number of groups and communities that we have established. Some of my communities have 4,000 people, some have 100 people, some have 40 people, some have 20 people. And we try and provide as much personal touch as possible. And we invite people to share their concerns and experiences and challenges that they're having, because success is very counterintuitive. I mean, we live in a world where less than 5% of people in the world have been able to design the life and lifestyle that they want. So obviously it's very counterintuitive. And just to give people some basic fundamentals and expect them to be able to smash the results is not going to happen without some input and interaction. So we do that a lot. Wherever time's accessible and available, I'm on the phone. I'm doing regular feedback sessions, training sessions with clients. Some of our clients get results very quickly. Some get stuck. Some get stuck because they're in their own head. And sometimes they can't see themselves doing what they're doing. Having said that, we are very big believers in the fact that we want to enable people. You don't give them the answers. You allow them to discover the answers for themselves by pointing them in the right direction. And because coaching, mentoring, and training are relatively new fields, we try and find out the best technologies, accelerated learning techniques. We try and incorporate what we can to facilitate not the quickest transformation, but the most sustainable transformation possible. We don't believe in quick tips and tactics. We believe in going to the actual deep work, doing the work, committing yourself to the process. And some people are just not hardwired that way. So a lot of the times our clients are in their own way. And so these are some of the challenges of the role. But yeah, absolutely. We have to monitor and we have to ask ourselves, can we deliver this in the best way? Are we delivering this in the best way possible with what we know, with all the technology that's available, with all the fundamentals and principles that we have researched? Is this the best way we can facilitate the transformation? If there's a better way, we're always looking for it.
I have a few questions for you, Ron, where I just want to kind of pick your brain, so to speak, to see, just give me answers as you get the questions without really putting a whole lot of thought. So, what do you think you're most thankful for at this point in your life?
The biggest gratitude I have is that I was born human. And I know that it sounds really, really weird, but the more I consider how there are, millions of species on the planet, and we are the only species that has the ability to create and choose at the level that we can, the more I start to realize I have an obligation to maximize this particular ability that I have been given. So this is something I do daily. There's not a day goes past when I don't think about the fact that how incredibly lucky we are to be human. In fact, I was having this conversation with my daughter last night. I said, do you realize just by being born human, you have such an advantage? Right? And so the point that I was simply trying to make to her was that we can always get caught up in what we don't have and what, how many limitations we have. But we've got to first make the realization that just being born in this species is such a huge privilege. And I don't think most of us realize. I think we just take it for granted.
And you've had so many pivots in your life, so many ups and downs. What are you most scared of at this point?
I don't think I have any fear. I mean, my obvious fears are, something happening to my daughter. You worry, but then also I kind of realize I've got to live in faith. My daughter is a gift to me, but when children are young, you worry about their future a little bit. You worry about whether they're going to have the ability to deal with problems, especially when you see so many youth struggling. Mm-hmm. My other fear is, my other thing. I won't say fear because I don't like the word fear. I don't live in fear, but some of the things that concern me is my inability to remain faithful to God. So this is something that I constantly test myself on is, since I started to become more spiritual and more evolved in my thinking, I started to realize that, there's a lot of things that I've developed a relationship with God. And a lot of times people don't understand this because I was an atheist for, until the age of 34. I only started to even understand that there was a higher power at the age of 34. And then I went beyond and started to realize that the higher power was more personal, not impersonal. And that's what we call God. So one of my biggest concerns is I never want to be distant from God again like I was for many, many years. I suffered as a consequence. And I never felt I needed God because I was able to do I was able to make so many things happen in my life without God. But I really have truly understood myself, who I am, what I'm here to do. And I've really only unleashed my potential since I started to recognize the power of God. This is a relatively new occurrence in my life, given that it's only happened in the last few years. But it's been the most powerful thing I've learned. And now it concerns me that we can get so caught up in day-to-day living, and we're all selfish. And there's always this tendency to look after your self-interest. And I think in those moments, it's sometimes easy to move away from God. And that's the thing that concerns me is I never want to move away from God again.
All right. And what are you happy about? What do you feel fulfilled about so many years down the line after you made your shift?
I'm so glad that I did it. I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to be able to show people the same pathway. I'm so glad that so many people have benefited from my own journey. And and my wife said this to me the other day. She said, "You always wanted to make a difference. You already have." She said, if you were to, we were talking about the fact that if I was to die tomorrow, she didn't say this, I said this. I said, if I was to die tomorrow, I don't think I'll have regrets because I started and I made what I did in the time that I had. I did all the things I wanted to do. So I'm very pleased about that. And I'm pleased that I chose to move towards uncertainty with faith, and not entertain my doubts. And that's one thing I'm proud of, is my ability to, I have doubts, I just don't feed them.
That's great. What do you look forward to, Ron?
Oh my God. There's so much. I wish I had 500 years. There is so much I want to do. We are doing so much work globally. We've just come back from a tour of Europe recently. I'm in India in a few weeks, running a few events. We have events in Indonesia, other parts of Asia, and then we're back in Europe and the United States next year. There is a lot of stuff happening. I'm really one of the things that I'm looking forward to is we're having our next biggest project is the Successful Woman, which it's going to happen in Northern Ireland. And we have booked in the dates. We've got women that are going to be flying in from all over the world. And that's something I'm really incredibly passionate about now, is to provide world-class tools to these women to be able to not just develop themselves holistically, enable other women to do the same thing, but also build a global business around it. Very, very passionate about it. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
And what would you like your legacy to be?
Look, I just, if I was on my deathbed today, or, I just want people to say, because of you, I realized who I could have become. If I can just make people realize how powerful they are. I don't think people realize how powerful they are. We've been told so many times, we don't really get it. We think we get it, but we really don't. Because if we got it, we would not be so hesitant and doubtful about going after what we want. And so if I can just make a lot of people realize that there is an element of them that is extremely powerful, and then how to bring it to life and to create the life and lifestyle that they want. If I can do that for as many people as I can, then that would be a life well lived.
Awesome. And what would be one takeaway that you would want to leave for our listeners today, Ron?
One thing that I would say to people is identify this thing called head trash. Head trash is how you speak to yourself in any way that disables you or disempowers you. Anything that you say to yourself that does not enable you or empower you is what I call head trash. Become very good at monitoring it and eventually get rid of it. Because things that we say to ourselves over and over and over again eventually become a byproduct or become a part of our subconscious conditioning, and it becomes a part of our personality. I'm extremely careful not to say anything about myself that I don't want to come true. And, because I started to, you understand the mind, you understand that, part of your mind has no deductive reasoning powers. And so many people speak to themselves in a way that berates themselves. And they do that for over days and weeks and months and years and decades. They speak to themselves in a way that disables them and disempowers them. And eventually they become disabled and they become disempowered in their capabilities, because it's almost like an instruction to your mind. So my number one tip would be, learn to become aware of the head trash and do not say anything to yourself that you don't want to be true about yourself.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ron. It was great trying to get a little bit deeper into your background, try to understand who you are and how you built yourself up to represent the organization that you run today. I know a lot of people hear about what you have to say, but I wanted to take them down a journey where they could see the real you, the raw you, so to speak.
I appreciate the work that you're doing, because the way I look at it is, you have decided that you're going to bring value to your community by sharing the stories. Well, number one, thank you for allowing the stage to your guests to be able to share their stories. It takes generosity of spirit to be able to do that. But thank you for also coming up with a concept that's quite deep, and it's real, and I like it's so specific around a particular thing. And I think stories allow people to realize the possibilities for themselves. And so the fact that you're doing that through your guests is fantastic work. I'm grateful that you had me on your show.
Thank you very much. If you like what you hear, please be sure to subscribe. And if any of this information helps you, please make sure that you share it with others so they might benefit as well. If you'd like to know more about me, please visit www.rajeevmudumba.com. And for more episodes like this, please make sure you visit Plan B Success. Thank you.